A very warm welcome to the CyberScotland podcast. My name is Mike Smith. I'm the Incident Response and Threat Intelligence Manager at the Cyber and Fraud Centre. It's great to be able to present this podcast today. I'm going to be discussing incident response, taking you through incident response from a few angles. Firstly, the services provided by the Cyber and Fraud Centre, a bit of background, the expectations of organisations should they call, the resources available through the CyberScotland partnership and the Cyber and Fraud Centre. Then, from a post-incident perspective, we'll be talking through the process of incident response following incident, what a business should expect if they're to involve one of our incident response cadre, and just how that looks. To do this and talk through the process from a private incident response company's point of view or perspective, I'm going to be joined by David Brown, who is the Senior Cyber Incident Response Team Consultant at the NCC Group. So firstly, David, thanks very much for coming along today and supporting the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming along to support this podcast and give us an industry angle on what a company or an organisation might expect if they were to deploy a private incident response company. I understand that incidents will be different, but we'll just go through essentially the incident response stages and what it is that your team at NCC can support an organisation with. So before I delve into the post-incident discussion I'm going to have with David in a bit, I thought I'd explain a bit more about the services provided by the Cyber and Fraud Centre and the incident response line. The incident response services provided by the Cyber and Fraud Centre are a joint venture between Police Scotland, Scottish Government and ourselves obviously, and there are three strands to the work that I do in relation to incident response. These include the management of the incident response line and calls to it and speaking to callers, management of the incident response cadre members and management of the incident response support content that's on the Cyber Scotland partnership website. So firstly, I mentioned the incident response line. There is a number that you can call, 0800 1670 623. 0800 1670 623. The organisations can call if they think they've been the victim of a cyber incident or are going through a cyber incident. Calls to the incident response line are varied. We have had business email compromise incidents, we've had ransomware incidents, DDoS, and we also receive calls from individuals. Whilst this essentially is a business support line, we'll do what we can to support individuals who, again, are having online or going through a cyber incident. So I staff this incident response line along with some of the ethical hackers from Abertay. We provide support for callers. Now, if it's a low-level incident and it's something that can be dealt with by way of advice and guidance, we'll do that. Speak to the caller on the phone. We'll follow up with emails and we'll follow the NCSC guidance in terms of cyber security and redirect. There's also the Cyber Scotland partnership website that has lots and lots of information. So if a serious or ongoing incident, that's when we move up a notch, and I would advise contact with one of our incident response cadre members. So these are trusted organisations with full accreditation who are able to support an organisation going through one of the incidents that I mentioned earlier. Could be a ransomware incident, for example. So they're Scottish-based companies, and they will work with the organisation to get to a recovery phase. We don't recommend any one cadre member over another. We just supply a list of those who are on our list. So at that point, we would then hand the calling company over to our incident response cadre member, and they would then have a relationship from then on. That's not to say that we wouldn't support organisations afterwards. We don't walk away from them. We have a lot of companies thereafter that we support. We give advice for staff. There is senior management level training that we can provide. There's staff training that we can provide, for example, exercise in a box, and then we also have contacts and relationships with Police Scotland, Scottish Government. So, for example, if there was a multi-agency meeting that was required, we could get the correct organisations round the table to support callers to the incident response line. So I just mentioned the incident response cadre a second ago, and this takes me on to the second point that I mentioned at the start. I manage this incident response cadre and those organisations who are there to support callers and those in need of incident response. So these businesses are accredited in incident response or possibly digital forensics, and as I said earlier, they will support a business through the second and last stages as they move towards recovery. So on the website there is a checklist, how to prepare your business for an incident. There's an emergency contact template, there's incident response communication templates, and there's also some documentation on the legal implications of a cyber incident. And you can download the pack at cyberscotland.com and then follow the links to incident response. So David, as I said earlier, thanks very much for coming along today. So do you just want to introduce yourself, tell me a bit about the NCC Group in Scotland, about your team and the services you can offer businesses in Scotland?
Yeah, sure. So David Brown, obviously I'm a senior incident response consultant for NCC Group, where I've been for the last 2 years. Prior to that, a little bit like yourself, I guess, Mike, I was a serving police officer for Police Scotland, where I spent 18 years. The last 7 of which was in cybercrime. I've got a Masters in Digital Forensics from Edinburgh Napier, and I'm a fully accredited member of the Chartered Institute of Information Security. In terms of NCC Group, NCC are a global cybersecurity business with focus of software resilience and cybersecurity. We're based in Manchester, we've got offices in Scotland and across the world. I guess we cover a kind of truly global footprint. We're one of the largest dedicated cybersecurity businesses in the world today. You know, in respect of IR, we've got one of the largest pure play IR teams in the United Kingdom. And what I mean by pure play is, we're solely focused on delivering incident response for clients. So whilst we've got a team who've got a pretty wide skill set from, Python engineers through to risk advisory, plenty of skills, the majority of that work perhaps sits in other areas of our business, allowing our team purely to focus on helping those who have been affected by a cyber incident. I guess we work with clients of all shapes and sizes. I think we're so big, a lot of people might think we only work with enterprise solutions, but we do. We work with companies with only a couple of members of staff, right through to major FTSE 100 clients with kind of global corporations. But what I would say is we don't have any bias towards one particular area. We work with public, private sectors, and we work with third-party sector organisation as well. I think just in terms of actually Scotland, obviously we're a partner with yourselves here at the Cyber and Fraud Centre. We're on your IR cadre. We're also a Level 1 member of the NCSC's Cyber Incident Response Scheme. We've obviously worked with yourselves. We've got a long history of working with the Scottish Government, and we're also a strategic partner of FinTech Scotland.
That's brilliant, David. Thanks very much for that. So I was going to ask actually later on in terms of the businesses that you service or the businesses that you support. You mentioned from small businesses right up to enterprise. So small business, NCC do support small businesses also?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, we've got a fully functioning 24/7 SOC. SOCs across the world, but our main SOC in the UK is based in Leeds, and we have an on-call cadre for our own IR team, which is 24 hours, and we will take and help anyone who's been subject of a cyber incident, regardless of the size of the organisation. Obviously, we work with FinTech Scotland, and that space particularly has a collective of organisations, some of which have only got 2, 3, 4 people. Others have hundreds or maybe perhaps even thousands of staff members. So NCC Group traditionally will help any customer or any client or any member of the public who's had that, their organisation or their business has been subjected to a cyber incident.
Right. So to give the listeners an idea of just how a IR process plays out, I've already discussed the cyber incident response cadre, the incident response line. So how would you describe the process once you were on board or had been deployed?
Yeah, so I guess perhaps maybe go through the IR process in terms of what that looks like, and then maybe some key takeaways, and then perhaps we can touch on the expectation of that kind of deployment from a business side after that. So I guess there's a couple of models out there that are probably quite well known to anyone in the industry. Probably the most common would be the NIST model, and then you've got the SANS Institute who work with the kind of Pearsall models, both well defined, and in essence they've got kind of 4 key phases are really preparation, detection and analysis, containment and eradication, and then we've got post-incident recovery. And what is really key in that last one is learning lessons from that incident and how that circular process feeds back into that organisation's preparation. Preparation, I guess, revolves mainly around organisations and cyber incident response plans or playbooks. What they may choose to have both or one or the other. Ultimately, that helps them prevent and respond to incidents. And like I said already, that's a really important process, and it's circular with that whole lessons learned piece at the end and how that feeds back into the preparation stage following an incident. Questions that are really key in that space is, who will run an incident? Regardless of the size of your organisation, you need to have an individual who will be able to take on the responsibility of leading that cyber incident, whatever that may be. You need to have defined roles. These should be outlined in your incident response plan, and you need to really be clear to allow you to respond effectively.
So would these respond? I mean, is this like an incident response team that would there be a team set up, or you say is this just individuals who understand the roles within the process?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, I guess, to be honest with you. But I mean, if you had a lot of organisations will have business resilience plans, and what they would do in an incident which was maybe around a building fire or whatever that may be, this should be no different. Right. We should be able to feed in through the plan and identify how an incident should run. So you would have, maybe a gold commander, if you like. And I'm not saying small businesses are in a position to have that, but someone who can run with the incident, make decisions, understand what needs to be done around, depends what's been taken. If you've lost private, personally identifiable information, it might be that you need to inform the ICO. What are the regulations around that notification? Who do you have to support you? Do you contact the Cyber and Fraud Centre? Do you contact Police Scotland? Do you contact NCC Group? And these are the areas of individuals that person really needs to focus on. I think from my experience, and probably many people's experience in the industry, plans are often found to be underdeveloped, if they even exist at all, to be honest. And we know from trends in the industry that the times taken to resolve incidents now are growing, and attacks are actually increasing in severity. And a plan actually helps you reduce the time an attacker has inside your environment. And I honestly can't stress enough the importance of having mature plans and playbooks. I was
going to say, just in terms of the human side of it as well, you'll have dealt with loads of incidents now in NCC, but also in the police, and thinking back to a few, was some that played out better than others was within the company or within these group of people who had these, was understanding escalation and understanding who can make the right decisions. The ones, especially in relation to ransomware incidents, were ones where it had reached a person who could make the right decisions and who could take the right steps to possibly, to go offline or to shut things down. But it had to go to the person that could make these decisions, rather than going round and round with people not really understanding what their role was.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you take that as a kind of detection and analysis phase of the model, has an incident occurred? What's the severity? What type of incident is it? And what impact has it got on you and your organisation? I think one thing that really sticks out to me personally from my time in the police is that kind of golden hour. Got a bit of a background in kind of emergency and resilience planning, and that first hour is massive. It's a bit of a policing term, I guess, just in terms of, don't panic, don't make knee-jerk reactions. But if you replicate that into the cyberspace, what can you do in that critical minute when you realise there's an attack on your system, or you're told there's something not right? Would you just pull the plug? And we do see it so many times. When you pull the plug, you lose volatile evidence, you lose the ability to collect information that might be able to benefit you when you're trying to understand how the attacker actually got into your system, why this has happened. So, I guess some key thoughts around the early stage of an attack are definitely don't panic and don't make those knee-jerk reactions. Isolate, don't shut down, take away your network connections, remove it from the internet, seek help, obtain a copy of the sample if you can. So if you see a file that's running in your estate that's possibly the cause of this, you want to try and capture that. You want to work to identify what that malware is. And what I would say is, if you don't have the skill set in your environment or in your organisation to do that, then you need to seek help from a third party. Now, whether that's through, cyber insurance, or whether that's through, a third party provider like NCC Group or anyone else on the IR cadre that's available through the Cyber and Fraud Centre, or alternatively, perhaps you have an incident response retainer, which are now popular. And that, against the question there is, and you hear it a lot in the industry at the minute, is cyber insurance or incident response, and maybe we can touch on that if we've got time towards the end,
Yeah, we were talking about deployment there, and you coming on board or IR coming on board. How do you deploy, or how would you? Is this a physical deploy, or mostly is it remotely, or how does that play out?
Yeah, so it very much varies, I guess. We have the ability to deploy anywhere in the world at fairly quick pace. If we take it to Scotland or the US, we've got the UK. Sorry, we've got consultants all over the country. Our ability to deploy is quite quick. What I would say is, and it's not really related to COVID, but technology allows us to manage and deal with incidents remotely. And I would say that probably 95% of all jobs that we do now are done remotely. So we would work with the company to allow us to take forensic images or forensic collections. In some instances, depending on the incident, we would deploy or try to deploy maybe an endpoint detection response tool to your environment so we could get a bit of a better visibility of what was going on. But yeah, I mean, in short, we can do either. It's really down to the client. Some clients will really need on-site, that kind of hand-holding period where maybe they just don't have the experience or anyone there to provide what we would need. And in that case, absolutely, we would deploy on-site. But the majority of people we work with have got some form of IT person behind them who would be able to follow our guides to get us the collections we need to allow us to then do our work.
Right, because I think there's a worry or there's the impression, you get a cyber company, I think it's even just the word cyber, but you get a company involved in cyber-related work that they're going to be coming in, they're going to be taking laptops or taking desktops away, there's going to be complete havoc to the company, and there you're saying that, with a wee bit work along with an IT company, you can deploy and there's very little disruption to the company itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what really is key there from that process, I think, is, it doesn't matter who the organisation is, there's mechanisms to allow us to keep that as everyone understands that you're going through a tough period. Some people's livelihoods are at stake. Everyone gets that. And one of the true unique aspects of an incident response consultant is the soft skills behind. It's not just, that technical element. That's a huge factor, obviously, but soft skills are vitally important. And, I suppose from my experience, coming from the police, we have our police officers naturally work with people every day from different walks of life. So you kind of build up that rapport, and it's important that you do that. And there is absolutely some really challenging situations, and it's just about that kind of empathy of the situation and how you manage that. But I don't think, I've certainly not experienced a situation that we couldn't manage, either that it was on site or if it was remote. And it's working with the people to make sure you show exactly a full understanding of what it is that they're going through and explain clearly what it is we're trying to achieve at the other side. I mean, you should always try and do some basic analysis to try and understand what the malware is. If the step is out your remit and you don't have the skills, and a lot of these smaller businesses, small SMEs won't have the skill set to do that, seek third-party assistance. Might not have the ability to pay for services, but there is options through here. Come to the Cyber and Fraud Centre, who'll be able to point you and give you some advice initially around triage, and then point you in the direction of a third party who will be able to give you some further advice. There's never a guarantee that it will lead to paid work, or it will cost you tens of thousands of pounds to actually engage their services. Seek the advice in the first instance. There is some other options out there around free public resources, but they come with some risks. So I would always reach out to a provider or your cyber insurance company, or if you've got an IR retainer, or utilise the free services that are available through the Cyber and Fraud Centre, and then just understand what your options are. But definitely don't panic. Isolate your network. Take a step back and try and understand it. But your incident response plan should be the key to this. It's about making them mature, getting them in a place that you understand each line by line process that you need to take when you've been subject to an incident.
Yeah, I mean, this is a live document. It's not something that gets stuck away on a shelf. If you think just of bigger companies, for example, staff turnaround, etc., these really need to be constantly worked on and being looked at.
Yeah, absolutely. They should be fluid and kept up to date as often as possible. And test them regularly. Test your own organisation regularly. A lot of people look to pen tests as a thing. And offensive security is amazing and it will give you a real insight. But sometimes, in my experience, I see organisations getting absolutely smashed by a pen tester when there's been nothing done in the past. So they do expose the vulnerabilities, but then sometimes you end up with a list as long as your arm of things that you just don't have the time or the resources to remediate. So there is other options out there from many of the IR providers that will focus on proactive assessments. So you do some vulnerability scanning. You could look at doing some threat assessments, just understanding what is actually vulnerable in your environment. Get that in a good place and then look to do a pen test. And that regular testing alongside reviewing your plans, look at maybe doing tabletop exercises or incident simulations. Again, just get the right people around the table, get these people who might be playing that gold commander, to make those decisions, understanding what they need to do around the regulatory bodies such as Police Scotland or the ICO, and just build out that knowledge. And I get that can be really difficult for some small businesses, but I think the most important thing here, and you hear it every day now, it's not if you're going to get a cyber attack, it's when. And even massive organisations who spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on defensive tactics and staffing and solutions, tooling, they still feel the same thing. It's when, not if, but it's how you respond.
So David, in terms of companies themselves, are there any mistakes or any more common mistakes that companies are making that you see once you've been deployed?
Yeah, I guess there's a pattern in what we see. We see, if we're doing reports, quite often we've got a bank of recommendations that are more often than not the same recommendations we're putting in there. Things like two-factor authentication is not applied to external services. The tooling, no kind of log aggregation. They're using default login values. So then what happens there is the collection of the data is minimal. So when a company or organisation, SME, gets or is subject to a cyber attack, it can be really challenging to then actually tell them, this is where initial access was, this was the computer that was targeted, and this is how they got in. So, that's a real challenge. But in terms of mistakes, what we often see is maybe not so much from a kind of an SME perspective, maybe more collectively across the board, but what we do see is lots of tools in place with an expectation that the tools are the silver bullet, and a lot of companies will rely on the tool. And I've seen some great examples where they pay a lot of money for some really expensive tooling that are alerting, but nobody's actually monitoring the alerts. And you can have all the tools you like, but if they're not looked at and managed properly, then they're completely ineffective. And that's a major problem.
We had an event and David from Adharma was there, and he made a good point similar to what you're saying. Stop buying security software and start buying software that's secure.
Absolutely.
Instead of continually adding to your software with more things that do X, Y, and Z, you probably don't need the majority of them. So yeah, I thought that was a really good way of putting that.
Yes, it's a great point. But as I say, the amount of time we've seen tooling deployed and it has identified the compromise, but there is so much other tooling in place, or they're not configured properly to block alerts, or they're just not being reviewed. And I guess there is a couple of other areas. We've got backups as a good example. Quite often you see backups are connected to the network. So as soon as someone deploys ransomware to your network, it's going across whatever a network share. It's picking up everything and it's wiping out the backups. It's an easy target.
Yeah, I was going to say in terms of backups as well. You mentioned testing and testing your systems and testing your processes. Some of the jobs over the last few years realise that I don't think companies realise sometimes where their backups are, how long it's going to take them to get back online, who it is that's storing them, and just, that's one problems I definitely saw was in relation to backups.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other one as well is a lot of people, and you see this time and time again as well, a lot of people will restore, and this probably really does apply to the SMEs, they get something goes wrong, and they just go back, go to a backup, pick a date and time, go back to a backup, restore it, don't do any analysis, and actually the dwell time of the threat actor was 3 months and they've gone to a backup 1 month down the line, and actually the threat actor's got persistence through a command and control beacon, and suddenly they've spent 80 man hours, maybe longer, 3 people, 10 grand and suddenly the whole system's brought back down again, and it's actually causing more reputational damage. You've got more outage, and it's costing you more money to resolve. So I think it's really important. I can't stress analysis enough. I think you need to understand what's happened and make sure you get the support so that you don't get targeted again. I suppose the last wee one is misconfiguration. I think with the move to the cloud, all the tooling that we're now seeing and kind of security tooling, a bit like what David had touched on, misconfiguration really quite often results in data leaks or service outages or account takeovers. It's just not configured properly. You've got conditional access rules for maybe your Microsoft 365 stuff that aren't actually doing anything. So it's a real challenge. I'm not saying it's easy by any stretch of the imagination, but seek help. Go to companies like NCC Group, like Adama. All these organisations will do cybersecurity reviews. They'll be able to review your Microsoft 365. Go in there, ask them for a quote, work out what they can actually do for you. You'll get some free advice along the way. Utilise that experience. Use what the opportunities that you have around, the Cyber and Fraud Centre, and that will make you more secure, give you more information, and ultimately lead to a stronger security posture for your environment and your organisation.
Yeah, we do have our trusted partners here at the Cyber and Fraud Centre as well, who are able to deliver on cyber essentials. I think it's and you've read about this in the press. It's about especially in startups as well, is not considering cyber security as an afterthought. It should be up there first and foremost, along with all the processes there are with setting up a business.
I think one of the things is it's easy to say. I really like the analogy, but if you move into a new office and...
Well, look at the cost of heating it now.
Well, never mind the heating, but if you move into a new office, you've got a regulatory requirement to have a fire safety plan. You need to have an evacuation plan, you need to test it. So why should it be any different with cyber? You put all of your organisation is now ran by computers, operated by individuals. Human error is a real problem. You're never going to stamp that out. You can do as much training as you want, but the threat actors are going to get smarter and wiser and always find a way to get past someone. You can do all the phishing training you want. I'm not saying don't do that. That's a really valuable technique and something that you should be delivering, but the threat actors will continue to get smarter, and they'll find vulnerabilities and they'll find ways in. It's about being as smart and as prepared as you possibly can be. And by having an IR plan which sits alongside your fire evacuation plan, it should be compulsory now, in my opinion. I'm not saying it should be regulated or there should be a law saying it needs to be there, but I think it should be as important.
Well, given the amount of personal information that companies are storing now, that could be an angle that we're moving towards. Move across onto maybe best practice or some tips essentially. Do you have any best practice ideas you could share?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of main points. Do your homework. Understand what you've actually got in place. If you don't know what you've got, then you're never going to be able to use it and understand it. Understand how they work. So if you've got Darktrace or an EDR solution, understand how those operate and make sure the alerting is in place to allow you to give you a chance to prevent an incident happening. And understand also where they fail. Remember, there is absolutely no silver bullet. And I think just in terms of some other bits and pieces, do a configuration, regularly review your configuration of your security controls. Hardening of your defences, patch management is a massive thing. We often see vulnerabilities that have been, you see it yourself. Patch Tuesday from Microsoft, maybe I think last week there was 3 0 days pushed out, but I think there was 95 vulnerabilities or patches identified from Microsoft alone. And that doesn't cover all the other software businesses out there. Manage Engine have recently had an exploit vulnerability, as have many others. The ESXi stuff, which has been kicking around of late. Patch management in any organisation is critical. We often see companies running Windows 2008 no longer supported. 2012 runs out in October this year. Some forethought just as to what you actually have and how you can protect it is vital. And a patch management policy, whether that's once a week, once a month, make sure that you have your patching in place. Regularly do AV scans across your environment. If that's an EDR tool that you've got in your environment and it's doing it naturally, maybe every hour, it will flag, but then you need to be able to monitor that and understand the alert. Or if it's just a basic AV, make sure it's scanning regularly and someone is triaging anything it finds. I've mentioned it already, but do some regular testing now, whether that's offensive security testing and vulnerability scanning, proactive threat assessments like I've touched on. Ensure all your detections are logged and reviewed. Like I said again, a lot of people we see, a lot of organisations we see have standard 20 megabyte security event logs in Windows. If that's on a busy server, they'll be overwritten within an hour, maybe less sometimes. And that really restricts what any incident responder or any forensic expert can actually tell you about your system. Yes, there is other artefacts that we'll go to, but we really want to see who's logged in, who's logged off, all these various bits and pieces that are in those event logs. AV, configure your antivirus to quarantine rather than delete. Quarantining will put the file into a safe space. It would allow a forensic analyst to go in and capture the piece of malware that's been deployed, capture it and then push it into a sandbox and perhaps run some analysis, maybe do some reverse engineering and understand exactly what it would do. If you clean it, it will remove it entirely. We'll no longer get access to that. So there's ways around configuring your AV. Ensure your security controls have tamper protection. We see it time and time again. Tamper protection can be turned on. It's not particularly challenging to do. It will prevent any unauthorized changes. Reduce your attack surface, get rid of unwanted software. Now, there is one thing I see every time I look at someone else's estate. We see TeamViewer, we see AnyDesk, we see Atera, Splashtop installed by a user who, wants to talk to a friend or, whatever. They've installed it for whatever reason. But threat actors will try and live off the land. They'll try and live with the tools that are in place on a device. Some organisations within IT will roll out sysinternals tools, so PS exec or procdump or any of these. We see these tools all the time, and if they're already on your system and a threat actor goes to use them, it might be that your AV or your EDR won't pick it up because it's already baselined to the fact that it's existing. And you're missing it, so they're getting free reign in your system.
I was taking note. I was also, in terms of unwanted software, is legacy software as well. We used to use that. We don't use it now, but we'll just keep a hold. The just because no one's taken the decision that listen, we need to get rid of that. It's unsupported. It's out of date.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think just use Microsoft's app blocker. Use other app blocking tools. I mean, the number of times I see Tor browser on a enterprise network is remarkable. I mean, block people using these tools. I get it, they're at work, they need their own downtime. There can be exceptions, but if it's the exception of an employee over someone bringing down your entire network, everyone's got their own mobile phones or their own iPads. Put communal iPads in place. Do not let them use enterprise solutions to be using software that's going to place your environment at risk.
So, in terms of SMEs, I mean, there's a lot of content there. I mean, is that doable for SMEs? All that, that's, or would essentially be relying on maybe managed service providers or managed security service providers to support businesses. Again, I mean, that almost goes back to getting set up correctly in the first place, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worked with a couple of the MSPs in Scotland. There's some great people out there, and your bigger providers will also offer that kind of managed service, I guess. But I think SMEs have a real challenge. They've obviously got limited staff numbers. They're maybe trying to grow their business. It's a challenge. There's no question. I mean, we've seen large organisations who have got small IT numbers struggle with this stuff, and I don't expect SMEs, but I think what you can do is prepare yourself as best you can. You can probably narrow down your security tooling you've got in place to one solution, or look to an MSP who can manage your solutions for you. And then perhaps the MSPs or MSSPs will then have relationships with IR providers, So it might be that they've got a retained service with NCC Group, for example. So you've got an MSP who's managing your infrastructure, and if something goes terribly wrong that's out with the MSSP, they can then deploy an IR solution on your behalf, or or alongside
about
you.
Relationships,
relationships are huge, and at the smaller the business, they matter more, you know.
I just want to finish off on one thing. I mean, this is, I've got friends who have got businesses, and bizarrely, I start banging the cyber drum now and again. And I've mentioned it to a good few of them, and they have come out with that one line. Listen, Mike, you don't worry. I've got cyber insurance. It's almost like a one-stop shop. And listen, I'm going to be absolutely fine. So, and you mentioned in your introduction actually about retainers, and obviously I'm touching on insurance now. Where does that sit? Or what are your thoughts on insurance or retainers?
Yeah, I think cyber insurance right now is a very political one almost, isn't it? There's lots going on in that space around what will and what won't cyber insurers cover. And I think just having been on a couple of panels and spoken with a couple of insurance companies, you can see there's a real reliance on them pushing companies now to do certain things before they'll underwrite their service, and whether that's you need to show what login you've got in place, you need to have a certain amount of baseline security tools and be able to prove that to the business. Now, I'm not saying for any stretch of imagination that cyber insurance is not something you should consider, because what cyber insurance will offer, it will offer you that legal assistance, the privacy stuff at the other side if you've had data stolen. It'll also offer you access to an IR company in most cases. So if you've got cyber insurance, it's a collective bunch of services providing you meet the criteria. But naturally, with the amount of ransomware that's been going on, I think premiums have risen exponentially. And one of the other options you could look at would be an incident response retainer with a company like NCC, Adarma. They all the higher, bigger kind of enterprise IR companies now offer that service where you've got access 24 hours a day to a cyber incident response company who can offer that immediate service. What I would say as well is we also have access to, and if you're a retained client with NCC, for example, you've got access to our privacy specialists, our kind of gold team specialists who can offer you that advice. It's a difficult one because I think cyber insurance definitely has a space and something to offer, and it gives you a full collective service. But it's certainly quite a topical thing at the moment around the cost and how many hoops you might have to jump through to get through the underwriters. But ultimately what they're doing is they want to make sure you're in a position that you're not a risk. So they want to get you as secure as possible when they take you on board. And I absolutely get that. And I think
if there was ever a time to read the small print, I think
absolutely.
I think it's now. David, we have covered a lot of topics there. There's a lot to digest and take in there. For me, it's just a huge thanks on behalf of the Cyber and Fraud Centre for taking time today to come in to give us an insight into incident response from your side.
Thanks, Mike.
We will be coming back again with a second incident response podcast where hopefully we're going to be speaking to a victim in the next few weeks who will give us an insight just how that played out. So thanks very much for listening today to this CyberScotland podcast, and bye for now.